What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Gunfish TV. I want to thank you for tuning in to my channel today. I appreciate it very much. So on today's video, we are going to talk about something that is very important and that you really should know how to do as a bass fisherman. Now, there's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to skip jigs on docks or skip a jig in general, but I really think in some of them they miss out on some important aspects of it. So I'm going to go over those with you all today, and I'm going to show you how to skip a jig and how to get better at it, and just what equipment you need, what jigs, what trailers work the best that I found through all my time on the water. And we're going to go ahead and get right into it. All right, so one of the main things that a lot of people forget to talk about when you talk about skipping a jig is your rod and reel combination. So this is an Abu Garcia Revo SX, and this is just a 7:1-to-1 gear ratio. And then this is a 7-foot Duckett medium heavy. So one thing when you're talking about the rod, what you want to do is you want to make sure you have a rod that has some parabolic action to it. A lot of people try to skip jigs with a rod that is way too stiff. And if you have a rod that's too stiff, that tip is not going to be able to load up and put that jig up underneath that dock. You know, you don't want to be forceful with it. You want to be nice and smooth, and you want to get that jig up under there and get it way back in the back of those docks where those fish live at. So you want a rod that has a good parabolic action to it. So this rod, like I said, this is an old Duckett Ghost, but you can see it's a medium heavy, but it has a lot of bend to it. So if it's too stiff, when you go to cast it and it loads up, that rod will not load and it will not skip that jig up underneath that dock. So you want to make sure that you have a rod that just has some tip to it. It has to have some tip to it. Now, another thing is the reel. Now, it does not matter what brand reel you use, you know, none of that matters, but you probably want to have a good quality reel. Anytime you skimp on the reel, the braking system does not work as good, and you want a reel that has a good magnetic cast control and a good braking system on it. That'll save you from backlashing big time. You know, you try to skimp on the reel, you know, you don't have good cast control, and which a lot of the cast control is with your thumb, but you know, you end up having a lot of backlashes, you get frustrated, and you end up just skipping out on the technique altogether when that could have been the way to catch them on that particular day out on the water. So make sure that you have a good quality reel. Something else is line. Now, one thing that is 100% true is now everybody uses fluorocarbon, and fluorocarbon is great. It's absolutely great. But for skipping, I'm going to tell you, fluorocarbon is a lot harder to skip with. The reason being, the line is stiffer. It has a hard fluorocarbon coating. Now, what I am using is, this is actually P-Line Fluor Clear in 20-pound test. But if you're starting off skipping jigs or skipping docks, I would definitely recommend a mono or a copolymer. So something maybe like a P-Line C21 is a good blend of copolymer and monofilament, and it's a really good line for that. But I'm using P-Line Fluor Clear. But like I said, if you're just starting, you definitely want to use a line that's softer and more supple, because that will save you from having a lot of backlashes, picking them out. Fluorocarbon, if you do, you know, end up backlashing, it is very easy to break your line off. So in other words, if you have like a little knot in your line or whatever, and you go to cast it out, your line will break, because fluorocarbon is so hard, that hard outer shell. So make sure that you kind of start off with mono copolymer, and as you get better, you move up to fluoro if you want to, and but that's all a preference thing. So that's definitely preference. Now, the next thing is your jig. So a jig is a very important part of skipping. You know, you have all different types of jig heads, and this is a Strike King skipping jig. Now, if you can see the head right there, it's kind of rounded and it's flat on the bottom, so that allows it to skip very well. Now, there's all kinds of different jigs. You have Arky style jigs, you have football jigs, and really all of them will skip. But a jig that's made particularly for skipping is going to skip better than any other jig, I can guarantee you. But one thing when it comes down to it is people never really mention the trailer. Now, a jig by itself is not going to skip good. You have to have a trailer on it. And this is a Strike King Rage Bug. And what I do is I like to cut the head down and I pull the legs off the side of it so it will skip a little better. But this is just a regular size Rage Bug. Now the reason this skips so good, and any other flat body trailer will work good as well, but if you have a wider, flatter surface for this bait to skip with, so when it hits the ground, or hits the water I should say, it skips a lot better. If you have a trailer with a narrow body, something like a grub or something, it's just not going to skip as good. So something with a wider body, wide tails, it really stays on top of the water and it skips really, really well. So as far as your rod, reel, line, jig, and trailer combo, those are things that you definitely want to, pay attention to, because like I said, you can get super frustrated if you're trying to use something that's not correct for the technique you're doing, backlashing, line breaking off, just not skipping good in general. Those are the types of equipment that you want to have. So now I'm going to stand up on the front of the boat and I'm going to show you all how I skip, how much line I leave off the rod tip, all of that. We're going to get into it. So we're going to skip some docks, and maybe if we're lucky, we can get a fish to bite. All right, so in the spring and fall, a lot of times bass will migrate into the backs of the creeks. And one thing that they get on, which is very obvious, is docks. They'll get up under these docks. They'll get up under the boat houses, up in the very backs of them. Sometimes they'll be out, more towards the front, under the boat slips or wherever. But a lot of times the only way to get to them is skipping a jig. And a jig represents, a crawfish, a baitfish, a bluegill, whatever. And it can be one of the most effective baits for catching bass up underneath docks. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how I cast it, how to control the line with your thumb, how to skip it, how much line I keep off the tip, all of that. And we're going to get right and we're going to start skipping some of these docks up here in front of us. So basically what I like to do is I like to leave about 6 to 8 inches of line off my rod tip. So I got my jig hanging 6 to 8 inches off my tip. And one thing that you want to do is you want to look at where you're casting, but you do not want to focus like on a single pole or something, because if you do, I guarantee you will throw your jig right into it. So I like to leave 6 to 8 inches of line off the rod tip and just skip it up underneath there. So nice and easy. You do not want to force your jig up underneath a dock. So you don't want to be rearing back, just slinging it as hard as you can, because you're going to end up hitting a dock post, you're going to end up backlashing, hitting the water too close to you or whatever. So you might be wondering, how loose do I keep my reel when I do this? And that's a good question. I do it just like if I'm normally fishing. If I'm going to cast this thing to a piece of cover or whatever, normal. So if I push my button, the jig falls at a fairly fast rate. So I definitely do not have it tight whatsoever. I have my magnetic cast control right here in the middle. So right here in the center, just between the plus and minus, or max and minimum, whatever your reel has, that's where I put it. Nothing crazy. Just skip it right up underneath there. Nice and smooth. You do not want to be forceful and sling it up underneath there, because you're guaranteed you're going to mess up. So reel it in, and you just want to be nice and smooth. So another thing is, when you're casting, you want to kind of roll your rod tip. So you want to have that roll action to it. And what that does is when you cast it, you're actually lifting your line up out of the water. So as you roll, you're rolling your rod tip back. That's what keeps that line out of the water, because your line has a lot of drag. So you're pulling your rod tip up when you do it, just like that. So it's basically like a roll cast, 6 to 8 inches of line, and you're bringing your rod tip up. That's how you want to do it. So something else, and I like to do it when I'm reeling it in a lot of times. Skip it up under there. But what I like to do is, once I work it a couple times, because a lot of times when they bite it, they're going to bite it right on your very first initial. As soon as you click that handle over and you come up, a lot of times he's going to be on it right then. They'll bite it, of course, sometimes as you're working it out, but a lot of times they're going to be up under there. But what I like to do a lot of times, once I skip it up under there, so I like to work it out, bring it up, pop it a couple times, And if I'm gonna reel it in to throw to the next spot, I like to reel it and I like to put my rod tip in the water. Now what that does is that lubricates your line pretty much. You know, water makes your line a lot slicker. If your line is dry, it's not gonna skip as good, you're not gonna be able to thumb the spool as good, and it makes a big difference. So, see right there, when I skipped it, I hit the water a little bit too close to the boat. So if you hit the water too close to the boat, it's gonna cause that jig to dive down in the water, and you're gonna end up getting a backlash if you're not careful. So you wanna, it's a good balance. You know, you can see kind of where my bait hit the water right then, and if you were paying attention with my last cast, I hit the water only about 2 foot closer to me, but it actually caused my bait to dive down in the water and almost give me a backlash. So 6 to 8 inches of line, roll. That's what you want to do. You want to roll it. And as you get better and do the technique more, of course, you'll be able to get better at it and skip it a little bit faster. So just like that. All right, so as you can see, we are bouncing up and down like crazy. So the reason I wanted to show you all that is because a lot of times when you're fishing some of these busy lakes, you're gonna be dealing with boat traffic, boat wakes, jet ski wakes, wakeboarders, all that good stuff. And that is going to affect how well you can skip greatly. So when you're trying to skip, and right now we have a nice, now that the wakes have stopped, we have a pretty nice flat, water. It's not very windy, not a lot of chop, and we're able to skip the docks a lot better, because when you have a dock and you have flat water, your jig can hit and skip. When you have a lot of wakes or a lot of wind, when your bait hits, it hits that chop and it'll hit and skip up off the water. So we're able to skip it up under there. We have this boat coming back by right now, so we're gonna have a lot more wakes right here in a second, but we're gonna get one up underneath that boathouse because that is where they like to get a lot of times. All right, so the next thing we're gonna talk about is distance away from the dock. Now, one thing that you do not want to do is, right now you see that I'm very close to this dock. You do not want to get too close to them. The reason being is because if you go to skip and roll, you have to have that bait gliding on top of that water to get up underneath of it. If you're too close and you try to do it, you have to cast at a downward angle, and you're gonna end up backlashing almost every single time. If you get close, you're much better off to do, a flipping technique, a pitching technique, or whatever, but skipping is not ideal. What you want to do is you want to back away from the dock, and I always like to say around 30 foot is a good distance. That's just for me. Now, it might be completely different for you, but 30 feet always seems for me to be a really good distance away. So we were able to get that bait, slide it right up underneath that dock, right up there in that shade, and if a bass is underneath there, most likely he's gonna jump on it. Now today we do have high pressure, no clouds in the sky whatsoever, which is actually seemingly a pretty good dock day, but I've been fishing a while today and the bite has not been all that great, I'm gonna be honest with you, but I wanted to show you all, a video on skipping docks. So right then, skip, got it up under there pretty far. But that jig, there he is right there. There he is. Oh, I just lost him. That was a nice one. That was a good one right there, y'all. It was about a 3 or 4 pounder. I saw him up under the dock. That's a bummer. That's my first jig bite I've had today, and that was a doggone solid one too, y'all. But would have liked to got him in the boat. But anyway, so getting it up on, that shows y'all the importance of being able to get that jig way up under there. I took it and skipped it up underneath that dock, up in that shade, and when I come up, that fish thumped it as soon as I come up, and that was a really, really solid fish. Really, really big bummer that I lost him, but that's the importance of getting it back there. We're right here in October now. These fish move in the backs of these creeks. They get on these shad and they just follow them back in these creeks, and these docks a lot of times can load up. And most of the time, the fish that you get bit from are like that fish I just lost. Solid 3, 4+ pound largemouth, and it's just a really, really good bite. But like I said, rod, reel, line, and jig and trailer combo is one of the biggest things that you want to make sure that you have right so you can be successful at skipping. So make sure you get a rod that has some parabolic action, loads up when you're able to roll that thing up under that dock. Make sure you have your right trailer with your jig, and then you'll be successful at skipping docks, and maybe you can catch a big bass. There he is. Got that one. A good one. That's a good one right there. Come here, baby. Get in here. And that right there is why you skip a jig on docks right there. That's a pretty one. All right, thank you, buddy.